Malta, trends in AML and regulatory enforcement.
Hello everybody, and welcome to this panel entitled Malta, Trends in AML and Regulatory Enforcement. We're very fortunate to be joined by three excellent and very experienced panelists who will be addressing this area together with me. Manfred Galdes, as you can see, managing partner at ARQ, and who has experience formerly also in government and as a regulator in the AML sector. Ekaterina Alexandrova Hartmann, who is the Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs at the European Gaming and Betting Association, and Joseph Attard, who heads the Compliance and Anti-Money Laundering Unit at the Malta Gaming Authority. Thank you all for joining us. We only have 20 minutes, so let's go straight in. Let me start with you, Joseph. After having published implementing procedures regarding anti-money laundering together with the FIAU back in 2018, an update was published last summer. Can you perhaps take us through, very briefly, sort of the main points that were updated, and also in view of the fact that we have been seeing now for, I guess, about 24 months, a steady stream of compliance audits conducted by the Maltese FIAU, but in fact run jointly with the MGA and with your unit, which has deep expertise in the sector. What levels of compliance or non-compliance are you seeing, and what are the main issues?
Thanks, James.
I pass the word to you.
Well, basically, the update is a reflection of the examinations themselves. So we identified some aspects that needed to be updated, mainly with the corporate entities and the MLRO, and the risks, which were also augmented even more in terms of products and in terms of customers. So one could easily go and review the updates, which are quite extensive. We also done a webinar with the FIAU in light of that for the sector itself. And as I was saying, these are mainly reflections of the examinations we have been conducting. Like you correctly said, we have been doing a number of examinations recently. These have been increased because, of course, the identified risks that emanate from the FIAU's supervisory plan and the risk assessment they do on the sector themselves. The requirement is what it is at this point in time. There are a number of high-risk operators that need to undergo AML examinations, and in a nutshell, basically, what we do is we take out lessons learned from these examinations. So a part of sharing the information and the findings with the operator themselves, we take that information on us to see where the sector needs to improve.
Joseph, overall, would you give an indication? I know it will be very ballpark, but are you seeing, the sort of compliance which you would rate overall industry-wise as at 80, 90, 95%, higher, lower? What is your feel as the person who has insight into each and every one of these compliance audits?
Well, when you take it into consideration that the sector has been subject person for the last 3 years only, you cannot not mark the sector in terms of on a high risk scale or on a high rating scale. So I would say 85% of the operators are doing what should be done. But let's not forget that 3 years is not quite a lot of time to transpose and change the culture that the sector had to go through.
But are you suggesting that there was previously a broad culture of laxity or non-compliance or disregard of AML issues?
Well, the regulations and the laws of the gaming laws always emphasize the AML CFT. But when the sector became subject persons, that changed the whole dynamic, because now they are gatekeepers as well. So you cannot really say they were lax. They had controls in place, but not to the extent there are today.
Sorry, but I will be interrupting the speakers because we have very little time. You said there are some operators which are high risk, but as far as I'm aware, the FIAU and MGA are conducting audits on every single operator licensed by the MGA. So did I misunderstand that perhaps you're targeting some and not others, or are you making a distinction between some and or others from which we should draw some inference?
No, actually the examinations are conducted risk-based, so not everyone undergoes the same level of depth. Everyone is somewhat reviewed, but the level of depth differs. A full scope examination is what we call it, is typically for the higher risk operators. And being high risk doesn't necessarily mean it's something negative. It's because you are exposed to higher risk elements in terms of AML CFT. So the requirement is what it is, that the supervisors, whether being the FIU or the MGA, would need to come and visit and do an in-depth evaluation of the control systems in place. So not everyone undergoes the same scrutiny, no.
Manfred, let me turn to you. You used to wear the FIU's hat. You're in, if I may say so. You're in private practice now. You see a lot of operators in your day job, and you advise a lot of them on this process. What is your assessment? Is this now sort of run of the mill? Is it what operators should expect pretty much day to day, or on a regular basis going forward, or is this triggered, for instance, by the concerns that Malta and the industry has about the positioning in respect of the Manival audit?
So thanks for this invitation. Thanks for the opportunity to share my views. Well, I think what has characterized the past 3 years is a big change. So whereas, as Joseph already pointed out, the AML requirements for gaming companies prior to the 1st of January 2018, since that date, we've seen a lot of change. We've seen, first of all, a mandatory set of rules that started to apply to gaming operators. We've seen implementing procedures being issued, and the new implementing procedure being issued that you referred to this summer. We've seen a big change in terms of the granularity of the on-site inspections carried out by the FIU and the MGA, and the focus. We've seen the introduction of the risk-based approach. We've seen more focus on source of funds, source of wealth, and thresholds being introduced as to when these need to be implemented. And as Joseph said, gaming companies have been very fast to react to all of these changes. At the same time, these changes, which mean more regulatory scrutiny, which mean possibility of penalties, we've seen some enforcement action as well. You know, all of these changes have triggered, I would say, a certain level of uncertainty, a certain level of concern, certain reactions within the market as to you know, this lack of clarity as what to expect. Now, is there a next step that we are uncertain about, you know, what exactly is going to happen? In truth, I wouldn't say it's run of the mill. I think there still is a lot of investment that is taking place in compliance. There still is a movement towards a change in culture. Not that there was no compliance culture before, but in truth, the expectations of the regulators today are not what they were 3 or 4 years ago.
I think, Manfred, there is a prevalent feeling in the industry that the industry is perhaps suffering also to an extent for the ills caused by others when it comes to AML and the approach, and that the FIU and the MGA are being, well, you said granular. Some think they are being harsh. And a lot of operators, I believe, have received or fear that they will be also fined. What's your view on this?
Well, I mean, as a jurisdiction, we've seen a lot happening in the past 3 years. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, the international pressure is there. Malta being evaluated in 2018, and the result of that evaluation requiring certain changes from the institutions particularly, but also from the private sector. So with all that pressure coming our way, and supervision being one of the areas that was given attention in the Manival report, and is being given attention in the ICRG process that Malta is currently undergoing with the FATF. So we're speaking about the international bodies that scrutinize jurisdictions and place pressure on jurisdictions to meet their international requirements. So because of that international pressure, it was expected that supervision was to go up a notch. So that doesn't really come as a surprise. At the same time, going up a notch is one thing. What we've seen in the past years, and I would say positively, because there was a need for this, is quite an increase in the number of on-site visits, quite an increase in enforcement action,
let
fines,
me
penalties.
interrupt you, Manfred, because my understanding of this whole Manival process is that an initial report, not available to the public, as far as I am aware, was produced in which, and this has been reported by the local media in Malta, the gaming sector fared, and I think I'm paraphrasing correctly here what was reported in the news, the gaming sector fared well. I mean, the auditors were quite impressed with how the MGA is run, the sort of the licensing and compliance and enforcement units, and specifically also with respect to AML. So how does this reconcile with what you're saying about the need to up the ante, as it were, in terms of supervision? And perhaps Joseph can also come in, and then for me not to interject again, can Ekaterina please come in and let us know from her point, which is really pan-European at the EGBA, with input coming in from their members on a daily basis about what's happening in different jurisdictions. Comment, please, Ekaterina, on whether you see this same sort of process and focus on AML in other European jurisdictions.
So if I may go first on this point. So the report published by Manival on the findings in relation to Malta found a number of deficiencies. One of them was supervision. But if you go deeper, as you correctly pointed out, James, the gaming sector fared, I think, in terms of all, if we had to look at all the sectors that were examined by the evaluators, I would say the gaming sector fared best. And in fact, there were some favourable comments about the level of supervision and the level of compliance within the remote gaming sector. So, yes, ultimately, to go back to your original question, it's all the operators in various industries that are ultimately under more scrutiny today, even those sectors that might have already been in a better place than others. But the ultimate judgment that was made when a snapshot at a point in time was taken of the Maltese systems and their ability to effectively combat money laundering was rather poor, rather dismal at the time. Now what we are expected to do as a jurisdiction is convince the international bodies that we have done enough to raise the standards and meet the international standards. And not just in gaming, obviously. So it's all the other sectors, and beyond that, all the institutions and bodies that form part of this ecosystem to combat money laundering and terrorism financing.
Joseph, would you like to come in?
Yes, sure. If I may add on that, it's correct what you're saying, that the snapshot taken in 2018, it was November 2018, it portrays the gaming sector on the right track. But that is because, of course, we've started the journey in the beginning of 2018. So the mechanisms we were proposing and portraying were basically, it was a signal that the gaming sector is on the right track and it's doing what is necessary to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. However, now it's 3 years down the line, and the supervisor naturally would need to portray, and even the sector, a better understanding of money laundering and terrorist financing risk. So it is necessary to keep up the momentum in order not to fall back and sort of diminish what we have achieved back in 2018. And like I was saying, it's risk-based. So what we're doing here, it's what is at the end of the day recommended, and what is an obligation from the directive itself.
Thank you, Joseph. Can we jump to Ekaterina, please? Because I'm interested to know, as I'm sure all of you watching, how this compares, and I'd like your viewpoint, having visibility of several operators.
Thank you. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here because there's a lot going on at the EU level and international level on the subject of AML. Maybe I start by commenting a bit on what the other speakers said. I mean, our industry is so closely connected to Malta, also in terms of like the perception of the regulators and the international bodies, that for us it is very, very important of what Malta is doing, and we are looking a lot to what Malta is doing. The Manival report, it is going to be crucial for how Malta will be viewed on the subject of AML, but also in a wider context here in Brussels. And there's so much going on AML. that we just need to kind of do our best in the situation that's ongoing right now. And actually what is ongoing is that the European Commission is going to change the rules on AML. And this process has already started. The European Parliament has issued already their views. On Friday, the European Council also issued their views, and everyone in Brussels is calling for stricter rules, a stricter approach, a more unified approach. So we will have new legislation on AML, which will be stricter. Obviously, the devil is in the details. It is now almost certain that the whole financial sector is going to move from a directive to a regulation, which means that there will be no more leeway for member states to decide how they want to implement AML rules. There will be a single set of rules, and this single set of rules is going to be much tougher than it is now.
And I think it's necessary to point out that there are disparities in the application or the transposition of the directives in different member states. Sticking to the gaming industry, we have, for instance, Germany requiring, I believe, face-to-face identification. When you say stricter, do you anticipate that the bar is going to be raised even further? Because the feeling in the industry is that it's already pretty strict, whereas there are several other industries which really aren't supervised very closely at all, and which potentially are of much greater concern in terms of anti-money laundering.
That is true. Now, whether our sector is going to move on to a regulation or it will stay in the directive is still something that needs to be determined. And hopefully we're going to have much more clarity about this by the end of the year. But overall, we are expecting that the rules are going to become stricter. Now, you mentioned Germany. There's also another example, the Czech Republic, which require face-to-face identification. This is something that we don't think we will see coming from the European Commission. I mean, requiring a sector that is a remote and online sector to identify face-to-face kind of really doesn't make any sense. And I think the European Commission knows that very well. So I'm not really worried that we're going to see some kind of measures like this. We're just going to see more strict measures, I think, and kind of also the requirement and the call for more supervision, because this is something that has been heavily criticized as well. And across all member states, actually. And Malta is one of those that are on gambling indeed doing better. But I think what we also need to look at is kind of encompassing all operators, because I had this conversation 2-3 years ago with the European Commission where they were saying, yes, we understand that your members are doing really well and implementing all of these and this and this and this, but our concern is also how the wider sector is doing, which we think is a very valid point. And that's why we as EGBA are working currently on kind of a pan-European set of guidelines on AML that are going to cover basically the whole process of conducting the risk assessment, customer due diligence, kind of really the whole journey that the customer goes through, as well as for example, what would be appropriate proof for source of funds. So it should go quite in detail. There are very few guidelines that exist like this, and which we think is kind of also a weakness in the AML framework. Like Malta has one, the UK has one, and now the Netherlands is working on one, which we think is a positive development, but we'll try to have kind of really a pan-European one that is also kind of looking to be future-proof, technology-proof.
And Ekaterina, sorry to interrupt, we don't have much time left, but what you're talking about is really trying to establish an industry standard by yourselves as an industry body, right?
Yes.
And in the hope that this will then be adopted broadly in the industry, perhaps also reflected in national legislations. Now, we need to wrap up. We don't have much time left, but I would ask for a last round of comments, and then from each one of you, specifically on the point which Ekaterina has been referring to. So regulation anticipated on AML in the financial sector. But of course, gambling is very particular. So whereas we have harmonization in the financial sector, broadly speaking, financial services broadly speaking, we don't in gambling. So why should we expect sort of different treatment and harmonization in gambling if we don't have it on any other areas to do with gambling?
Yeah, if I may start, it will boil down to what is imposed by the EU, of course, and there is a problem with licensees having multiple licensees that need to adhere to different obligations, of course, which creates a big headache for the sector. So in a way, it could be a positive thing. But again, one would need to see the level of scrutiny and the level of rigidness these regulations are going to be imposed before we determine whether these are going to be positive or negative in a way.
Just to add something else to the picture, there also were discussions in a proposal by the Commission in June about centralization of the regulatory body. Now, probably this will apply to the financial sector, and it's not clear whether it would also apply to the non-financial sector. It could also apply just to banks. But seeing the direction of the EU going towards more harmonization and more centralization, even from a supervisory aspect, I think we have a clear trend here that the institutions within the EU want to see more power in Brussels when it comes to regulation and supervision. And so I think we need to be focusing on what is happening in Brussels and following what is happening in Brussels, because it will definitely affect operators operating within Europe.
Ekaterina, let's close off with you.
Clear trend. Yeah, that's a clear trend. I agree. We are going to have more regulation. We're going to have stricter regulation, and there's also going to be a much bigger focus on enforcement. Already, the Commission is really kind of hammering this down on member states. There are a lot of infringement cases on lack of proper implementation of the current legislation. And what we will see here is, while it remains to be seen how this will work out for gambling, we are going to for sure see the trend of tougher legislation. It may not even happen immediately, because there are some discussions about a two-step approach, but the trend is very, very clear, and this is definitely where we're going in the next years. Other sectors are going there. Real estate as well is going to be much more regulated. So again, the trend is clear.
Thank you, Ekaterina. Thank you, Manfred. Thank you, Joseph. So the industry had better be prepared and preempt these changes rather than have to react and adapt its processes with hindsight, I suppose. Thank you all for following this panel, and enjoy the rest of this virtual conference.